They say cruelty wears many faces, but the worst is the one that smiles, that performs kindness while destroying you, that speaks of God and mercy while ensuring your death. And I learned this when I was 24. Learned it from people I had considered friends. People who smiled when they came to arrest me, who spoke gently as they bound my hands, who told me this was for my own good, for my soul's salvation, for the protection of the community. And they smiled, actually smiled, as if they were doing me a favor rather than condemning me. And I looked at their smiling faces, and I felt more fear than I would have felt from open hatred. Because hatred is honest, reveals its intentions, gives you something to fight against, but smiles are deceptive, make you doubt your own perception, make you wonder if perhaps they are right and you are wrong, if perhaps being arrested is actually kindness, if perhaps your own terror is the problem rather than their actions. And they prayed while I was imprisoned, prayed during my trial, prayed as I was sentenced. And their prayers were not for my rescue, but for my conviction. Not for truth, but for my guilt to be confirmed. Not for justice, but for their own righteousness to be validated. And when I fell, when I dropped from the scaffold and the rope caught and my neck broke and I died, they prayed then too. Prayed with their heads bowed and their hands clasped. Prayed with expressions of solemn satisfaction. Prayed thanking God that evil had been removed, that the community was safe, that righteousness had prevailed. And then they moved on. Moved on immediately. Moved on as if I had never existed. Moved on to their dinners and their families and their comfortable lives. And I was simply gone, simply erased, simply forgotten before my body was even cold. And this moving on was worse than the smiling or the praying, because it revealed what I had always been to them, which was nothing. Was an obstacle briefly encountered and removed. Was a problem solved rather than a person destroyed. And they felt nothing, no guilt or doubt or sorrow, felt only relief and righteousness. And they slept peacefully that night and every night after. And I carried this knowledge, carried it through death and resurrection, carried it through decades of surviving what should have killed me, carried the understanding that good people who smile and pray can destroy you just as thoroughly as evil people who hate, and perhaps more thoroughly, because you cannot fight smile and prayer, cannot defend against kindness that kills, cannot expose cruelty that wears the face of concern. And they are still there, still smiling, still praying, still moving on from the lives they destroy. And I am here, still carrying what they did, still unable to forget what they forgot instantly, still burdened by what cost them nothing. My name is Mercy Holloway, and I was born in Salem in 1668. Born into a community where everyone knew everyone, where your reputation was your most valuable possession, where being liked meant survival and being disliked meant danger, and I was liked, was genuinely liked by most people, was friendly and helpful, and the kind of person who remembered birthdays and brought soup when someone was sick. And I had friends, real friends I thought, people I trusted, people who trusted me, people I would have defended against any accusation. And I believed they would do the same for me. Believed that friendship created obligation, created protection, created a bond that would withstand pressure. And I was wrong about all of it. Learned I was wrong in the span of a week that transformed me from beloved community member to condemned witch. And the people who smiled while arresting me were my friends. The people who prayed watching me fall were my friends. The people who moved on were my friends, and perhaps that was the real lesson, that friendship is performance. That people who seem to care about you actually care only about the version of you that is convenient. And when you become inconvenient, they will destroy you with smiles and prayers, and then forget you completely. And this understanding has made me incapable of trust. incapable of believing in friendship, incapable of opening myself to others, because I know now that closeness is just another form of vulnerability. That love makes you visible, and visibility makes you target, and being target means being destroyed by people who smile while doing it. The accusation came from someone I barely knew, came from a stranger passing through Salem who claimed I had looked at her wrong, had given her the evil eye, had cursed her with a glance, and this was absurd. Was clearly the paranoia of someone disturbed, was something that should have been dismissed immediately. And I expected it would be dismissed, expected my friends would laugh about it later, would mock the stranger's foolishness, would use this as an example of how witch hysteria made people see threat in nothing. But instead, when the stranger made her accusation in meeting, when she pointed at me and said I had cursed her, my friends did not laugh, did not defend, did not speak. They sat silent, sat watching, sat waiting to see which way the wind would blow. And when the minister asked if anyone could speak to my character, if anyone knew me well enough to vouch for me, my friends, my dear friends who I had known for years, who I had helped and supported and loved, remained silent. And this silence was not neutral but damning, was interpreted as agreement, was seen as evidence that even those close to me suspected me. And I was arrested that afternoon. Arrested by men who included Thomas Hart, who I had considered a friend, who came to my house with others, and he apologized as he bound my hands, said he was sorry it had come to this, said he had always liked me, said he hoped everything would be sorted out, and he smiled. Smiled as if his hope and his apology made the bonding acceptable, made being dragged from my home less violent. And I looked at his smiling face and I felt betrayed. Felt that if he truly hoped everything would be sorted out, he could simply not bind me, could refuse to participate, could stand against this. But he did not. He bound me gently and smiled, and apologized and participated fully in my destruction, while acting as if his kindness during the process made him innocent of it. The prison was cold, and I was there for a week before trial. And during that week, I received visitors, received my friends who came separately or in small groups. And they came crying, came saying they could not believe this was happening, came asking how I was managing, came performing concern, and each of them said some variation of the same thing. Said they would testify for me if they could. Said they would defend me if it were safe. Said they wanted to help, but they had families to protect, had reputations to maintain, had positions to consider. And I understood that they were telling me they would not help, that their concern was performance, that their tears were for themselves rather than for me, that they were crying because watching me fall was uncomfortable for them. And they wanted me to absolve them, wanted me to say I understood, wanted me to make them feel better about abandoning me. And I did. I actually did. I told each of them I understood, that they should not risk themselves, that I would be fine. And I said these things because even in my own destruction, I was still playing my role, was still being the kind, understanding friend who made others comfortable, who absorbed their guilt so they did not have to carry it. And only later did I realize that this too was part of how they destroyed me, by making me complicit in my own abandonment, by making me comfort them while they participated in killing me. And I had done it, had actually comforted them. And this made me more angry at myself than at them. Angry that even facing death, I was still prioritizing their feelings over my own survival. The trial was worse than prison because it was public, was performed before the entire community. And I sat in the prisoner's box, and I watched the room fill with people I knew, with neighbors and friends and acquaintances, and they smiled at me. Actually smiled with sadness, smiled with sympathy. smiled with the particular expression people make when they have already decided you are guilty but want to appear compassionate. And the stranger who had accused me testified first. Testified about the evil eye, about the curse, about how she had sickened after I looked at her. And her testimony was vague and uncertain, was clearly the product of fear rather than fact. And I kept waiting for someone to challenge it, to point out the absurdity, to demand actual evidence. But no one challenged, no one questioned. Everyone simply nodded and took notes. And then they called witnesses to speak about my character, to testify whether I was the kind of person who might be a witch. And my friends testified. My actual friends stood one by one and they said I had always been strange, had always been too confident, had always seemed to know things I should not know. And they described normal interactions we had had, normal conversations, normal moments, and they reframed them as suspicious, as evidence of something wrong. And they did this with expressions of regret, with voices that shook, with obvious discomfort. And this discomfort was presented as proof of their honesty, as evidence that they were telling painful truth rather than comfortable lies. And I watched them destroy me while performing anguish about it. And I understood that this performance was intentional, was designed to make them look noble, was turning my execution into their moral achievement. And they were building reputations on my death, or demonstrating their own righteousness by sacrificing me. And they smiled while doing it, smiled with sad compassion, smiled with the faces of people doing something difficult but necessary. And I hated them more than I hated the stranger, more than I hated the ministers, more than I hated anyone, because strangers and ministers were doing what they were supposed to do, were fulfilling roles. But my friends were betraying actual connection, actual history, actual love, and they were doing it for nothing, for convenience, for comfort, for the ability to sleep peacefully knowing they were on the right side. I was convicted in less than an hour, convicted based on vague testimony and reframed friendship, convicted because no one would defend me, because silence was interpreted as agreement, because my friends' sad testimonies were more convincing than any defense I could offer. And I was sentenced to hang in 2 days. And as they led me back to the cell, I looked at the people in the courtroom and I saw relief on their faces. Saw them relaxed now that the hard part was over. Now that they could go home and tell themselves they had done right. And I saw too that they had already moved on, had already dismissed me from their thoughts, had already begun planning dinners and meetings and life continuing exactly as before. And I had not even died yet, and I was already forgotten, already erased, already gone from their lives in any way that mattered. The night before my execution, my closest friend came to see me. Came crying, came saying she needed to tell me something, needed me to know that she had tried to defend me, had wanted to speak for me, had prepared testimony about my goodness. But her husband had forbidden it, had said defending an accused witch would make them suspect by association, would risk their children, would destroy everything they had built. And she had chosen to stay silent, had chosen her family over our friendship. And she wanted me to forgive her, wanted me to understand, wanted me to tell her she had made the right choice. And I looked at her crying face and I felt nothing. Felt that whatever love I had carried for her had died somewhere between her silence at the trial and this moment. And I said nothing, gave her no comfort, offered no forgiveness. Simply stared at her until she left crying harder, left carrying guilt I refused to absolve. And this refusal was the only power I had left, the only way I could resist, and I took satisfaction in it. Took grim pleasure in making her carry at least some portion of what she had helped create. They came for me at dawn, and the scaffold had been built in the village square where everyone could see. And the crowd was large, was most of Salem, was people I had known my entire life, and they stood in groups talking quietly. And when I was brought out, they fell silent and they watched. And I searched their faces looking for something, looking for doubt or guilt or recognition of injustice. And I saw nothing but satisfaction. Saw them pleased that righteousness was being served. Saw them comfortable with what was happening. And as I climbed the scaffold, the minister began to pray loudly so everyone could hear. Began to thank God for protecting the community, for revealing evil, for giving them strength to do what was necessary. And others joined the prayer. My friends joined the prayer. The people who had smiled while arresting me now bowed their heads and clasped their hands and prayed for my death to be swift. Prayed for my soul to be saved even as my body was destroyed. Prayed with absolute conviction that they were righteous, that this was good, that God was pleased with them. And their prayer was worse than any curse. Was the sound of people convincing themselves that murder was holy, that betrayal was duty, that destroying someone you claim to love was actually the loving thing to do. And I stood there with the noose around my neck listening to them pray. And I understood that this was how good people justify evil, by calling it good, by surrounding it with prayer, by performing holiness while committing atrocity. And when they pulled the lever and I fell and the rope caught and my neck broke and darkness came, the last thing I heard was their prayer. Was them thanking God that the witch was dead. Was them moving seamlessly from causing my death to celebrating it. And they felt nothing, no doubt or guilt or pain, felt only righteousness. And this righteousness, this absolute certainty that they had done right while doing wrong, was the thing that stayed with me through death and beyond. But I did not stay dead, was brought back by those who practiced the old ways, was cut down after they declared me dead, and revived through methods I still do not fully understand. And I woke in pain and confusion and rage. And the old woman who had saved me said I had been chosen, had been saved because I had not accepted, had not forgiven, had carried my rage into death, and that rage had kept me tethered, had made it possible to bring me back. And she said many died accepting, died forgiving, died absolving their killers, and those deaths were final, were complete. But deaths that carried rage, that refused forgiveness, that rejected the narrative of righteousness, those deaths could sometimes be interrupted, could sometimes be reversed, and my rage had saved me. My refusal to comfort my killers had saved me. My unwillingness to participate in making them feel better had saved me. And I would need that rage, would need that refusal, would need to hold on to it rather than seeking peace. Because peace was what they wanted, was what would let them move on completely, and I would not give them peace, would not let them forget, would not allow them to live comfortably with what they had done. I went back to Salem in secret, went to watch them to see how they lived after killing me. And I saw that they lived well, lived exactly as before, lived without any visible burden. And I watched my friends at market and at meeting and in their homes, and they smiled and laughed and lived. And they never mentioned me, never spoke my name, never acknowledged what they had done. And I understood that they had moved on completely, had erased me so thoroughly that I might never have existed. And this erasure was more painful than the execution, was the understanding that my life had mattered so little that my death changed nothing, affected nothing, meant nothing, and they were happy, were content, were sleeping peacefully while I was sleeping on the ground in the forest outside Salem. And this disparity, this absolute injustice of it, fed my rage, kept it alive, kept me focused. And I began to work against them, began to help others they accused, began to use what the old woman taught me to protect those they wanted to destroy. And every person I saved was revenge, was proof that their righteousness was powerless, that their prayers meant nothing, that they could smile and pray and move on, but I was still here, still resisting, still fighting, and I would never stop, would never let them have the peace they took from me. Years passed and I watched them age, watched my former friends become grandparents, watched them gain respect and comfort, watched them live full, long lives without ever acknowledging what they had done to me. And I wanted them to suffer, wanted them to carry guilt, wanted them to be haunted, but they were not. They lived peacefully and died peacefully, died surrounded by family, died believing they were righteous, died without ever understanding what they had done. And when each of them died, I felt nothing, not satisfaction or closure or relief, felt only the continuation of rage. The understanding that justice was not coming, that they had won, that they had destroyed me and moved on and faced no consequences. And the injustice of this was almost more than I could bear, was weight that should have crushed me. And perhaps it did crush me. Perhaps the woman I had been died on that scaffold, and what survived was just rage in human form. Just fury that learned to walk and speak and appear alive, while being fundamentally dead in the ways that mattered. I am old now, impossibly old, older than I should be, kept alive by rage and magic and refusal to let them win completely. And the people who smiled while arresting me are long dead. The people who prayed watching me fall are dust. The people who moved on have been forgotten themselves. And I am still here, still carrying what they did, still unable to move on, still trapped in the moment they destroyed me. And perhaps this is my curse, not that they killed me, but that they killed me so easily, so casually, so completely without consequence. And I survived, but I did not escape. Survived, but remained frozen in the moment of betrayal. Survived, but never healed. And I tell this story not because I think anyone will care, not because I think it will change anything, but because silence is what they wanted, erasure is what they achieved, moving on is what they did. And I refuse still, refuse always, to let what they did remain unspoken, to let myself be forgotten, to move on from what was done to me. And perhaps this refusal is victory. Perhaps refusing to forget is the only justice available when actual justice is impossible. Perhaps carrying rage is better than carrying peace when peace would mean accepting the unacceptable. And I carry it through centuries. Carry it as the price of survival. Carry it as the weight of witnessing. Carry it as proof that some things cannot be forgiven, should not be moved on from, must be remembered even when everyone else has forgotten. And I remember, I testify. I refuse, and that refusal is all I have, is all I am, is the only thing that makes surviving worth the cost.